I recently had the chance to witness the last debate between Adam Friended and a Marxist on the classical issue of Marxism versus capitalism. And to be painfully honest, I have to admit that I didn't really like the debate. I feel it was quite chaotic, and I was especially dissatisfied with the way in which they dealt with important economic issues that were pretty much hand waved away and they weren't dealt properly with. And I don't want to make a thorough analysis of the debate. In fact, I don't want to comment pretty much on any of it, but I do want to make room for discussion on the issue of universal basic income, which was brought up by Adam Friended in that debate and in other places, because I believe it to be a central problem in today's capitalism. And the way in which Adam Friended deals with this issue is quite interesting and can reveal some of the deep contradictions of our present society. To begin with this discussion, I believe it to be quite important to give a proper contextualization of the historical moment in which the need for a universal basic income emerges. And here it is important to note that universal basic income becomes a problem in the age of the inclusion of robots and of very sophisticated machinery in the production process that, in a sense, takes out of the production process laborers that would otherwise be perfectly capable of working at a normal wage. And this is a reality that we all have to live with, even the ones that defend capitalism and defend the mode of production that depends on private property, because its effects on our economies and on the well-being of people are quite visible, and it's leading slowly to let's say, need for implementing certain measures that can increase the standard of living of the working class at an age where their working potential is quite damaged. So since we all agree that this is an actual problem, it is not hard to see why the need for universal basic income has been claimed not only in the left, where a lot of people would intuitively put it, but also, and quite importantly, in the right, by people such as Adam Friended. And this is because the contradictions of capitalism are becoming so obvious that there needs to be a solution to them, even within the framework of those that defend the capitalist mode of production. And so let's look at this issue more in particular, and let's see first of all why Adam Friended thinks that we should implement this measure. What are the benefits of it? What is its outcome? It's what we would like of it.
And I keep thinking, isn't it a best case scenario if you're just getting money from the business and you're not actually working there at all, like you have nothing to do with the business, which is basically the idea behind UBI.
So here he seems to be making the argument that what would be desirable is for us to just pay people for not engaging in any actual work and instead employing their labor on whichever thing they personally deem important. And whereas this might seem very nice and beautiful in theory, in practice it is nothing more than a utopia, at least in the present, because we currently do not have the material capacities for generalizing this form of living. And this is something that is quite obvious. I mean, paying people for actually not working is potentially harmful for the intricacies and the sophistication and strict coordination of the division of labor that unleashes the potential of capitalist societies. So even within the capitalist framework, this just doesn't make too much sense. And in fact, a lot of libertarian defenders of capitalism have been specifically critical with universal basic income precisely because of this issue. And it is actually an issue to take into consideration, because paying people for not working is something that we currently cannot afford. We still need people to produce goods and services for not only for themselves but for society as a whole. And instead of just focusing on giving them a pay and enjoying leisure without actually engaging in productive labor, I would say that what is more important now is on how to organize production in a way that makes workers feel self-determined and that actually makes them satisfy their lively goals, not outside of labor but within the act of labor. And this is something that, of course, in this fantasy land might be good, but at the present we cannot again afford this form of living. We need to focus on production, and we need to focus on how to make production more democratic, more enjoyable for those who are employed on it. And by focusing on production and actually giving the workers a say on this whole process of automation and the way in which it's going to affect their work, is actually going to help us solve a lot of the problems that come with automation. What we need is not to focus on how to make workers live sort of decently outside of labor, but on how they can employ machinery in a way that is beneficial for them, and how they can actually enjoy more the production process using the advances in technology and in engineering and so on and so forth. But this is not the only issue that I have with Adam Friendet's position, because when it comes to addressing the problems of universal basic income, his main concern seems to be this one.
I think UBI may cause inflation, and that's the argument against against it. And I'd like to know more. I think I'm going to start watching some videos on UBI. I'm going to dig into it more. I might do some EFAP style videos, just watching UBI videos by myself and commenting on them. Yeah, hidden inflation. I mean, I worry about inflation.
And so out of all the varied and critical problems that universal income faces, the one that seems to be bothering him the most is precisely the one that should be bothering us the less, or at least should not be bothering us too much, which is inflation. And I want to be specific here, because it is true that inflation, according to the quantity theory of money, appears if in your economy you keep the velocity of money constant and the quantity of goods and services produced in that economy constant, and you expand the money supply massively. This is obviously going to put upward pressure on prices. But what we are assuming here, if we consider this to be the problem of universal basic income, is that first, our economy has a very limited amount of goods and services circulating throughout it, and second, that this quantity is fixed, that essentially doesn't rise through time, and that the productive potential of our economy cannot accommodate the wants and needs of people who can afford those wants and needs. And this is far from the truth. I mean, our society is, especially, and if we look at the United States, this is particularly the case. Our societies, meaning by this our Western modern bourgeois societies, are characterized by, and this is something that Alan Friendlet accepts, superabundance, are characterized by an immense productive potential. And this is something that is widely accepted amongst economists as well. What's more, what we are assuming here is also that, in a sense, this universal basic income was going to be financed through the printing of money by the Federal Reserve and the expansion of the monetary supply by this method. But this is exactly the way that it is not attempted to be financed. It is rather attempted to be financed through the redistribution of the already existing wealth. And if that wealth exists, it means that it has been created, and that therefore our economy has the capacity to redistribute it, which is precisely in the manner in which it's attempted to be financed. And this leads us precisely to the real problem that universal basic income faces, which is how it is going to be financed and who is going to end up paying for it. And this leads us pretty much to a theater act, a theater play that is acted in given stages. And I think that this particular play was beautifully played in this debate that I also watched recently by two Spanish economists, one a libertarian Austrian economist named Juan Ramón Rayo, and another one communist that I am not pretty much sure whether he's a Marxist or not, but his name is Daniel Raventos, and they are both pretty well-known economists in Spain. And the way in which this argument was acted out was essentially the following. Daniel Raventos, which is the one that was in favor of the universal basic income, studied very in depth how you could possibly finance this. He did studies with other people, and he showed essentially that even the Spanish economy, which is not the most productive one, is pretty unproductive, but even the Spanish economy has enough wealth and enough productive potential to finance the universal basic income, which was followed obviously by the reply of Juan Ramón Rayo, who suggested that, it might be the case that we have the productive potential to finance this, but what you're not taking into consideration is the elasticity of the taxable base, because if you want to finance a program like this, you're obviously going to have to increase taxes. And if you want this to be a measure that actually helps the working class and the middle class, you would actually need to put more fiscal pressure on the top income earners, right? So what happens if the elasticity of their taxable bases, meaning how sensitive the amount that you can tax out of the very, very rich people is to increases in the marginal tax rates? What happens if this elasticity actually makes it so that if you increase taxes into these people, you're actually going to receive less revenue than the one that you were receiving before? This is a central issue that I don't see a lot of the people in arguing in favor of universal basic income addressing, and it's precisely because they think they have this idea that in a sense everyone is going to be willing to pay the increase in taxes that is obviously going to have to occur. And when you have people that understand how our economy works saying, what is going to happen with those very rich people that are obviously going to seek for new ways or to extend more the ways already existing for evading paying taxes and actually reduce their taxable income? How are you going to deal with this? And a lot of the people don't actually deal with this. They consider our economy to be, in a sense, static, and they don't take into consideration this dynamism, not only on the part of the very wealthy, but also on the part of the poor or the very poor, who might reduce their working hours or might stop looking for more jobs because they're going to be taxed anyway, so why even bother? And in this particular debate, like in many others, the moment that Juan Ramón Rayo brought about this criticism, this notion of how are you going to finance the program completely disappeared out of the debate. It was not spoken ever since. The debate then continued speaking about political philosophy and whether it is moral or not to have a universal basic income, but this particular issue was pretty much ignored ever since, because if you want to implement this notion, it is obviously going to be ideologically convenient to ignore this important fact about our economies. So this debate was actually a very good debate, and some of the things that we are able to extract from it are quite good. So if if you are fluent in Spanish and you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend you watch that debate. And from here, we really get to the conclusion that this problem of the financing of universal basic income has two manifestations. On the first hand, we can ask whether or not our economy has enough wealth, enough productive potential as well, to justify, to implement a universal basic income. And to this question, the answer in all the Western developed countries is pretty much yes. And this is what studies like the ones done by Daniel Raventos show, that our societies in fact do have enough wealth to redistribute it to the lower and the middle classes. And then the second question, which emanates from this one, is yes, if we have the wealth, how are you going to get it redistributed at a time where there is all of this financial and legal trickery in order to avoid paying taxes and in order to reduce your taxable basis, especially when these critical tax increases occur? So sure, the wealth is there, but how are you going to circulate it? Because today it is virtually impossible to circulate all of this wealth, especially at a time where the bargaining power of workers is so low. So this is pretty much the central issue here, and these are things, for Adam Friended to consider, because he obviously, and he admitted this, hasn't considered this topic yet very profoundly. And he says that he's going to watch some videos on this issue. And this is precisely what I think that he should be bothered. Not on inflation, not on these pretty vague issues, but on the central one, which is how are you going to finance it? And how are you going to circulate wealth if that is the method through which you wish to pay for this high expense that universal basic income is going to represent? And the reason why this is a problem is precisely because of the contradictions of capitalism. Because capitalism puts a small group of people on top of a huge amount of economic power that obviously translates into political and legal power, and it essentially diminishes the foundations through which we can actually make capitalism sustainable in the long run. And this is something that I already showed in my videos on inequality and exploitation, but it's something that is central to this issue, because capitalism doesn't provide us with the material conditions to implement this sort of measures that would otherwise be possible in maybe future socialist or communist societies, specifically because the capitalist class is not going to accept this redistribution, is not going to want to some individuals in the capitalist class, and in fact this is the case, might in fact want to be taxed more, but this is not going to be a generalized thing. The capitalist class as a whole is going to avoid this, and you are going to have to get to more radical changes if you want these programs to work at all. And furthermore, even if in the short run you got these tax increases through and you were actually able to increase revenue so as to finance universal basic income, the contradictions of capitalism and the deep causes of capitalist crisis, such as the falling rate of profit, are still a central feature of capitalist societies, even if we include a welfare state, even if we include universal basic income, depending obviously on which universal basic income. But the deep contradictions of capitalism are still there. This is just as arguing for universal basic income in a feudal society. Sure, I mean, it's better for peasants to have more money, to live better, but the deep contradictions are still there, and the problems that emanate from them are going to manifest themselves regardless of how well the working class or the middle classes do. However, I do not wish to be a naive Marxist and just dismiss completely universal basic income without actually looking for under which conditions it might be something acceptable and it might be something that we could fight for. It is the case that I am extremely skeptical and critical of universal basic income, as I think every other Marxist should be, but we must not just dismiss it completely and try to look for ways in which we could actually defend some of it. So let's look at the different requirements that this program should meet in order for me at least to be able to accept it. First comes the question of who is actually going to receive this universal basic income, and here I'm going to argue that universal basic income should actually not be universal. And this is quite obvious because I do not think that people like Bill Gates are really in the need of receiving an extra $600 every month. So universal basic income should be reduced only to those classes that actually need an extra help, especially the middle classes as well. I'm not just arguing that the lower classes should receive it, but especially the middle classes as well, because they are also, in a sense, the heart of our economy, and we should incentivize spending and investment on their part as well. This gets us to the second question, which is how big this payment is going to be. And here I want to stress the fact that what we are really looking for is an improvement in the lives of the working class. And this comes through an actual increase in their income. So it is important here to take into consideration that we want to improve their standard of living, but we do not want, in a sense, to disincentivize work, and we do not wish to stop or to defeat a strong and proper coordination of the division of labor. So for that reason, we should devise an amount a payment per month that would improve their bargaining power when it comes to the labor market, because if they're going to receive a proper income, even if they don't work, this might benefit them in the negotiation process with the capitalist class, but not too big so as to disincentivize work. Here we might be, my estimate is probably around $600 to $1,000 per month for working class men and women, and around 100 to 300 for their children. And then the last important question is how exactly we're going to finance this. And again, here I think that we should address the problem of how you wish to increase taxes and to who, because normally these programs they should be forward looking, because and in Spain we have an experience of this. If in the short run you wish to increase government spending, but you're not going to be very clear about how you're going to finance it, you are very likely going to find that if top income earners decrease their taxable basis, you're going to end up either increasing exponentially your deficit, which is something that at some point or another you're going to have to decrease, or you are going to have to put more fiscal pressure on working class families and on the middle class, which is precisely what we do not want. We want to help the middle class and we want to help the working class. We do not want them to suffer the burden of these sorts of programs. So this is something that we should be aware of, and we should, for that reason, devise a system And here I think that we should devise a system that is international, so that not only one country but a lot of countries in a coordinated manner should try to implement this position, so that capitalists cannot just go switching, to Ireland and to other countries with the intention of evading taxes and so on and so forth. And we should also defend further political and legal pressure from the part of the government to actually make sure that the top income earners pay this particular program, because otherwise this fiscal pressure is going to be passed on to working class people and to the middle classes, or it's going to be translated into a reduction of welfare programs and of maybe even medical aid and all of this, which we obviously do not want. So we need to have, again, a clear and precise measurement of how taxes are going to increase, in which manner they're going to do so, who is going to be, in a sense, holding this burden. And second, we must make sure that the ones that hold the burden, which are the ones that actually control and have all the wealth in our society, which is the top 1% and so on, that they actually pay. Because if not, the burden is going to be passed on to other people that we wish to help, not deteriorate their conditions. However, the case that I am presenting is pretty much an ideal case scenario, and it's only meant to be the specific circumstances under which me at least, but many other Marxists should in fact accept this sort of program, which is under the circumstances where programs like this can actually help the working class and the middle classes. But again, this is not, a specific way of how universal basic income should work. I still do not defend universal basic income, but under these circumstances, I would be, prone to liking it a lot more than on the ways in which it has been devised so far, especially by right-wingers like Milton Friedman, who want to substitute it, who wants to substitute welfare programs that help to some extent the working class with this, so that you can have a decrease in welfare, which is something that we, again, do not want. So with that being said, this is it for now. I am open to debating this issue like many others, and if Adam Friended wishes to debate this more deeply, I will very likely do it. This is it for now. I will see you in the next video.